GearNetwork.com.
This is a Gear Network production. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this podcast. If you're looking to support this podcast and this network, visit shopgear.com. That's shopgere.com. It will take you right to amazon.com, to your Amazon account, and you can do all of your Amazon shopping. The difference is using our link versus going to Amazon's link is that you are telling Amazon that Gear Network referred you, and they end up giving us a small percentage of your purchase, which helps out this program and this network entirely. And of course, if Amazon's not your thing, it's understandable. On gearnetwork.com, G-E-R-E network.com, if you click on the top bar that says donate to Gear, there's several different PayPal buttons. You can donate to us as well if Amazon isn't your thing. Your support is vital to helping the Gear Network maintain this programming, this quality programming, and continuing our growth through the year. As always, thank you very much for your support and your listens and your downloads and your likes and your shares from all of us here at the Gear Radio Network.
You're listening to Better Live Than Dead.
I just go with what's put in front of me. I have no expectation going in, so I made some calls. I made a lot of calls to set the table on trading away a couple guys, and I made a few calls on trading to see if I could make a hockey trade, get younger. And this is the end result.
And with that, we welcome you to BLTD 102.5, the NHL Trade Deadline Reviewcast. And I got to say, before we introduce the co-host, which you all know him, it's Brayton. He's on the line with us right now. But before we introduce Brayton, it was less a trade deadline and more a bore-a-thon, or a bore fest, whatever you want to call it. I don't know where I'm going with this, but it was boring. 10 trades overall throughout the National Hockey League on trade deadline day. But right now, like I said seconds ago, Brayton Wilson is joining us online at BJ Wilson on Twitter. How was your trade deadline, Brayton?
Well, it was very uneventful. I sat at our WGR studios in Amherst and pretty much filled out the trade tracker throughout the day, paying attention to Twitter, refreshing about every 10 seconds, hoping that the Sabres would make a deal or, something would eventually happen. But there were only a couple of notable deals on the day, and it was just very, 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 very boring.
And I got to say, too, the overall feeling over at the KeyBank Center this afternoon, which is where we were based, Better Live Than Dead was set up there. The feeling was there's a lot of angst because not many people knew what was going to happen. Not many people knew what the Buffalo Sabres were going to do. And then obviously, as it turns out, they made no trades. The only trade they made this season was acquiring Matt Bodie, a defenseman who is going to play in Rochester most likely. I mean, especially now with no defenseman being traded, Matt Bodie will definitely go to Rochester. And then in return, the Sabres send Dan Catanacci to the New York Rangers organization. He'll likely go to Hartford. So it's just a minor league deal. Now, with Tim Murray, you can get his comments, and they were some very poignant comments he did make. It was about 15 minutes or so. We'll have that up over at bltdsports.com. So if you're listening to this directly from Spreaker or on iTunes and you want to hear what Tim Murray had to say, aside from what we played at the start, go to bltdsports.com, go to the post with the BLTD Podcast 102.5, and then the video will be right below the podcast. We'll have that there for you here shortly. Tim Murray was very shell-shocked, it seemed like. When the the major hockey media announced the Buffalo Sabres were done for the day, local Buffalo media was getting kind of hard on Tim Murray in the KeyBank Center to kind of give you a look behind the fourth wall. A lot of people were saying, what is Tim doing? Is he overvaluing players? Did he screw up completely? And then you see Tim Murray walk through the door, and all of that cleared out. Like, the media was hungry. The media was ready to rip him a new one and say, what are you doing? You're going to lose these players for nothing. Tim Murray walks to the door and looks like he just, like his dog had just died, just a blank face. And he goes, I don't know what happened. Tim Murray said he had calls. He made calls. He had a call on Brian Giunta. He had some calls on Evander Kane, and nothing materialized. And there's not much you can do about that if that happened.
Yeah, no, getting the sense of listening to Tim Murray today, it just seemed like that he was I mean, it just seemed like that he was looking to make a deal or two, hoping that something would happen, and nothing eventually happened. And it seemed like, I don't know if he was upset, or I don't know if he was, annoyed, angry, probably a little bit of everything. I mean, he wanted to go into this deadline, I'm sure, and he wanted to get a couple of assets for some players that he, quite frankly, is probably going to move on from at the end of the season. And he didn't get anything in return for them. So now the chances are they're going to go to free agency and they're going to be able to walk, whether that's Cody Franson, Brian Giunta, or Dmitry Kulikov. But, and it seemed like that he got called. I mean, he definitely got calls. He got calls on Kulikov, got calls on Kane and Giunta. But, I mean, Brian Giunta still has his no-trade clause. He had the 5 teams that he could, accept a trade to. And I don't know if he got a call from one of those 5 teams or if it was from another team that wanted his services, and he has every right to deny them if he wanted to. Evander Kane, the price is probably extremely high right now. It's the highest it's probably going to be, at least until summer, when maybe more of a hockey trade can happen for Tim Murray, but I don't think any team was willing to fight on Evander Kane at this moment without really knowing what's going to happen the rest of the season or what's going to happen to come, and if Evander Kane can stay out of trouble off the ice. And for guys like Kulikov and Franson, Kulikov, he's probably still playing hurt, which probably deterred a lot of teams away from trading for Kulikov. And honestly, Tim Murray probably could have gotten a conditional pick out of it. Maybe if, something very similar to like what Jerome McGinley garnered from the Kings, where it's just like a conditional fourth where, yeah, I mean, if the Kings make the playoffs, then yeah, you get the pick. But if they don't make the playoffs, then you don't re-sign again at the end of the season in free agency. Then you get nothing. So, I mean, and then for Franson, just kind of, I don't know what exactly you were going to get for Cody Franson, just because he's such an inconsistent player. Sometimes he'll play like he's on fire, then the other times he's just making mistake after mistake after mistake and costing the team some valuable games. It's difficult to really determine what Tim Murray could have gotten for every pick. But, I mean, I'm sure he's very disappointed. And the overall market, especially, that really was just a stud of a day. And I'm sure that he was disappointed that he wasn't able to do his part as general manager and make his team better at the end of the day.
Well, and Tim Murray did mention, kind of going back now over everything that that you had said there, because Tim Murray did drop a lot of important nuggets not related to trades. I mean, he did mention he got a call from Brian Giunta, called Giunta and said, look, this is what I've been offered. Would you like to go there? Giunta said, no, thank you. Understandably so, because Tim Murray did say, Giunta wants to stay in Buffalo. I don't know. Maybe we won't know until after it happens, but I would have to assume, just me being logical, Giunta being from Rochester, being from the Western New York area, growing up a Sabres fan, ends up playing for the Sabres, has the opportunity to play his 1,000th career NHL game this season for the Buffalo Sabres. That on top of the fact that if he decides to retire after the year, which I don't know if that's even going to happen, he could finish his career with the Buffalo Sabres. I think that played a lot into the factor. Tim Murray did mention that a lot of teams called on Kulikov, but with Dmitry Kulikov, the sticking point seemed to be the back injury, which is why we all thought that there was some interest, but the interest kind of would wane off, is because no one knows what's wrong with Kulikov, and no one knows if he's okay, if he's 100%. I mean, he can play through it, but it's got to be sapping something on his end. As you mentioned with Cody Franson, again, we didn't really hear much on Franson. He's more of a depth guy at this point. He's more of a 6, 7, 8 guy maybe on a good playoff team. So obviously no team felt that was necessary to make that move. But Tim Murray did also mention, he said, I wasn't trying to make deals like with Detroit and New York made where, you get a second and a third for a defenseman. Tim Murray said he just wanted fair market value. And if the fair market value wasn't there, you can't give the guys away for nothing, because at some point in time, you're going to hurt your organization. If you trade Cody Franson for a 4th or 5th round draft pick, what's that going to turn out to be in comparison to what it's going to do to your team? Tim Murray did point out the Buffalo Sabres are 6 points out of a wild card spot. There's not a lot of games left to make up that margin, but crazier things have happened. Teams go on runs. We've seen it happen before. The one thing that was interesting to me, and I can't remember who asked the question, I do apologize for that, but somebody asked about the potential of starting contract extension talks this offseason for Evander Kane. And Tim
I know
Murray,
who asked that question. That was
what was that, Brayton?
That was WGR's Paul Hamilton that asked that question.
Okay. So yeah, Paul Hamilton. It was a fantastic time to ask the question because Murray kind of seemed a little more open than usual. And when asked the question, Tim Murray flat out said, essentially he wasn't interested in doing that right now. And that sounds kind of, after the season Evander Kane has had, that sounds kind of crazy. But that, you still have to remember Evander Kane has had a bunch of off-ice incidents. He's had trouble keeping his nose clean in Buffalo in terms of keeping his name out of the headlines. On the ice, he's a fantastic player. Off the ice, he's still got a lot of maturing to do, and they don't know if it makes sense to sign him long-term if he can't stay out of trouble. Now, I mean, we could go to the offseason, the Sabres could sign Kane to a contract extension. It could be and this could be a non-issue. But the one thing that was interesting to me is how Tim Murray immediately backed off of that. He didn't say, yeah, we're going to talk, we're interested. He said, I'm not 100% sure yet what we're going to do. I'm not really interested in entertaining that right now. And I almost wonder if that kind of gives, if he kind of inadvertently gave away his hand by saying, they're not interested in re-signing Kane at this point in time in the offseason or discussing a contract extension. They didn't say they didn't want to re-sign him. They said they weren't interested in a contract extension talk right now. I wonder if that gives away Tim Murray's hand as to what he wants to do this offseason with Kane.
Yeah, and I think Evander Kane, with the way that he's played, he's certainly shown, I'm still the player that I am. I'm the player that everybody hoped that I would be in Winnipeg, and if I can stay healthy, because with a player like him, it's going to be hard for a guy like him to stay healthy because he gives 100% of the time. And for Kane, he's scoring goals. He's putting up production for the first time in many seasons. He's got 2 straight 20-goal seasons, which is very good, and that's really what we kind of want out of Evander Kane, except, we would love to have him score more and be even more productive, but right now, for what he's doing in the time that he's played, and with the injury that he had earlier in the season, we couldn't be happier with what Evander Kane has done this season. He's still doing everything on the power play, penalty kill. He's forechecking really well still. He's playing responsible hockey in his own end. But yeah, the big issue is his off-ice problem. He needs to stay out of the bar life. He needs to at least control himself when he's out in public. He needs to find ways to stay out of trouble, whether that's, hanging out at different bars in different areas or not going out in general, then that's what you got to do. And if I'm Evander Kane, he's 25 years old now, and he's got to realize, okay, it's time for me to grow up a little bit. It's time for me now, especially with the way that I'm playing, and I'm going to be needing a new contract, whether it's with the Sabres or whether it's with another team in the future. I need to show people that I can play top-notch hockey while being responsible and staying out of trouble off the ice. And of course, if he continues to stay out of trouble for one more month, his charges for last summer's incident are going to be dropped, and he'll be clear of that. But if he gets in trouble again, that's probably strike 3 for the Sabres point. And then around the NHL, it's not going to be a good look for him either, just because that what general manager, what owner, what coach is going to trust Evander Kane to be a reliable, responsible person off the ice. While, yeah, you can play really well and be a superstar on the ice, you got to be able to represent your city, represent your team well off the ice. So for Evander Kane, that's going to be something that we'll look at not only heading into the offseason, but really into the future and seeing, can he be responsible? Can he stay out of trouble? Can he be a good community person? We've seen what he can do with working with kids. He's done events where he's given kids he's giving kids money and gift cards to go out and buy stuff at stores for Christmas, and that's great and all. But if away from that, you got to be able to still represent your team very well. And if Evander Kane, continues to get himself under the microscope with teams taking a look at him and saying, well, he's not a really good character off the ice. that could affect his future not only in Buffalo but around the NHL.
Now, the one thing I do want to mention, kind of moving off of that at this point, there are a few names that did move today that some people may be interested in. First off, old friend Thomas Vanek moves from the Detroit Red Wings over to the Florida Panthers, which will be an interesting fit. And then we get old friend Drew Stafford, who moves from the Winnipeg Jets, traded there in the Vander Kane trade last year. I'd like to see how I tie that in. Now with the Boston Bruins. So we will see what happens there with those two guys. But the one thing, Brayton, because again, there's not much we need to really discuss here today because not much happened. I mean, honestly, I almost fell asleep twice at the arena during the trade deadline. It was that dull. I love going there, love hanging out with everybody, love seeing everybody from the local media. But I'll tell you what, dude, it was dry today, as I'm sure you know. But the one thing that was pointed out to me that I keep hearing more and more about. Maybe it's just I'm hearing about it now because I'm not paying as much of attention as I normally do. But last year we saw kind of a player mutiny against Dan Bilesma. Now, granted, the Sabres ended up in a 41-game span playing to the pace of a normal. If they played over 82 games, they would have got 94 points. That's how well they were playing the last 41 games of last season. But now as this season has gone on, we are continually seeing, we're not hearing names, but we're continually hearing rumors that some players are tuning out Dan Bilesma. Now, with the recent struggles of the Buffalo Sabres paired with this talk, the growing talk, it's not even just rumblings. It's where there's smoke, there's fire type of deal at this point. A lot of people are talking about it, and the rumblings are getting louder and louder and louder. That now, if this continues to happen, is this something where we may see an important player sent out of town, or do you think the Sabres need to pull the trigger and get a voice in that locker room where they can, that voice in the locker room can control the players and get on the same page as the players? Because again, I'm not advocating the firing of Dan Bilesma. I think he's a damn good coach. He has made some mistakes. Everybody does. Sometimes, recently, especially with the Buffalo Sabres not being able to hold leads, in a tight playoff race where they need to win games, they're losing games that they're leading by, 2 goals or more. So things haven't been great lately, but overall, it hasn't been bad. Do you think that maybe we reach the point soon where Bilesma needs to go because he's losing the players? Or do you think said players need to go because they are not following the rules? Maybe 3 or 4 guys, I don't know how many, aren't following the rules and it's affecting the rest of the team. Should those players go instead?
Well, I mean, it's certainly not a good look for the Sabres because you want your coaches and players to be all on the same page, and if that's not happening, of course, you got to make some sort of decision. And I mean, it depends on who the players are. I mean, if it's a player like Jack Eichel, Jack Eichel's going to obviously take more precedence over Dan Bilesma at this point. If that's the case, Dan Bilesma's likely going to get axed at the end of the season, and the Sabres will be looking at a brand new coach, probably shortly after. But I mean, it's so difficult because if it's just a couple of players that are tuning him out, and those players aren't going to be part of the long-term future, then, Tim Murray can obviously just look at that and say, okay, you guys aren't going to be here. You're not following orders. So we're going to move on from you and deal with you accordingly. But, I mean, it seems like at this point there's a considerable amount of players that are continuously tuning out Dan Bilesma. Because, I mean, I don't know what it is, but the message is not getting clearly sent through to the players. I mean, the past 3 games are indicative of that. The game against Colorado, they come out of the bye week, and Tim Murray mentioned it today. He said that he was not happy about how the Sabres played in the Western trip. On Saturday, Sabres came out flat in the first period. It was a horrible first period. Then the second and third period, they brought it within a goal. And every time, they never showed enough urgency to get back in the game. It was like they were protecting a 1-goal lead, and they eventually lose. On Sunday, they get a 2-goal lead, and then they sit back. They sit back and think, we've got the lead. Let's just play with the lead, 2-0. That's awesome. But they keep pressing, and not saying Arizona's a good team, but in general, all good teams will keep pressing, and they will keep applying pressure, whether they're down or up. And then the Coyotes showed they were the better team that night. They got 3 goals in the third period to win in the dying seconds of the game. Same sort of situation against Nashville last night, where Sabres get out 4-2 early in the third period, and all of a sudden they just start sitting back again. It's just like, what message are you guys not getting here in the locker room? Especially when you had a night like Arizona where it was the exact same damn thing going on. I mean, get a clue. I mean, I hate saying stuff like this because this team should know this already, and the team has been under for nearly 2 full seasons now, and I don't know what's getting. And it's not just a few players. It seems like it's at least half of them that's not getting credit. That's not getting through to them. I mean, they sat back against Nashville and let Philip Forsberg walk all over them, and then let Nashville continuously get chances to try and get the puck on Robin Leonard. I mean, Leonard's facing a number of shots. He's facing 30-plus shots every game, and I was mentioning it to one of my coworkers. It's just like, I don't understand what it is. The Sabres defense is really, really bad this year. I mean, maybe as bad as it's been over the past few years, where, I won't say that the tank year was a better year than this year, but I mean, this year they're allowing shots to get to the net. I mean, Robin Leonard is doing a good job, and he's keeping pucks out of the net in a relatively basis. But it's just like, come on, limit shots. Don't let them get in. Skate with the puck a little bit. I mean, there's so many times the Sabres just get the puck, whether it's on the penalty kill or when they do have a lead, and they just dump it down the ice and then either go off for a change or they'll step back up defensively. It's just skate with the puck a little bit. Just, move the puck down the ice. If you don't get a shot, then possess the puck. Kill time on the clock. That's really what this game is about. It's getting puck possession, whether it is shooting the puck or whether it's keeping the puck in the offensive zone. That's all it is. And the Sabres just don't do that enough. And then they sit back and they let teams continue to fire shots on net, continue to get the scoring chances. And in the past 2 games, it's shown that the Sabres can't hold the lead because they give other teams too many opportunities. So, I mean, going back to the original point, if the Sabres, if it's a good group of players that are not getting the message and, have lost Dan Bilesma, then unfortunately for Dan Bilesma's sake, he's going to be out of a job by the end of the season. The Sabres aren't going to fire Dan Bilesma right now. I'm pretty sure about that. Because, I mean, who's going to take over? Dan Lambert, Terry Murray, Bob Wood? No way. I wouldn't have any 3 of those coaches. I know Terry Murray's coached in the NHL before, but he really didn't have much success in the NHL. He had maybe a year of success in LA, but I mean, it would just be the same system. It would be the same regurgitated stuff that Dan Biles was trying to teach, and there's no benefit in that. I mean, the best thing to do is hold on to Dan Biles for the rest of the season. If you decide to move on from Bilesma, you fire him right after the season's over, and then you begin your coaching search, whether that's bringing in a guy like Gerard Gallant, if he's still available and not gone to the Las Vegas Golden Knights, or the Vegas Golden Knights, I should say, or you bring in some fresh blood, bring in a new guy that is looking for a chance to coach at the NHL level. And there's a couple of guys out there that would be very interesting names to hear about. It would be very interesting to see if they'd want to coach. And I think that maybe the Sabres would look for that rather than a guy that, kind of just regurgitated, throughout the league through coaching and everything like that. I mean, it kind of ties in a little bit with the Bills, if you agree with this, where it's like, you bring in guys like Rex Ryan, who's had some success in New York with the Jets, then he just starts losing. I mean, I don't know what it was in New York that got him lost him the job, and I don't know if it was the locker room or whatnot, but he loses the job in New York, comes to Buffalo, and then it's just like Buffalo just keeps regurgitating these old coaches. And it's sort of similar with the Sabres, but.
Well, and the one thing I want to mention, Brayton, too, is the one thing we've seen recently is that a lot of as the stories kind of go on, when there's, like I said, there's smoke, there's fire. You see some stuff come to the surface, and now as the Buffalo media starts to get all this information regarding a potential coup against Dan Bilesma from the players, you start to hear more stories about how the Bilesma system in Pittsburgh was lauded as being, too difficult, overly complicated, stuff like that. And then you start
Right.
when you mention the Bills, that's exactly what you heard from the Buffalo Bills when they said, Rex Ryan wanted to coach to an opponent, not coach to a system. And you think of stuff like that and you wonder, I mean, maybe you just need to simplify it a little because, yeah, it is nice to have things that are fancy and difficult and all that stuff. But then again, if your own team can't understand it, then maybe you're headed down the wrong path here.
Right. And the thing that seems to be a popular thing with people around Buffalo is that the Bills now, instead of having Rex Ryan, who just who wasn't that good of a coach, they bring in a kid like Sean McDermott, who has never really had a coaching job, but he's young, he's confident, he comes from good roots, and it seems like that the players already like him, and he's getting a good rapport around the league. Now, looking at the NHL, the Sabres, the Bills have the really good players. I mean, they've got good players, but the Sabres are young. The Sabres have talent. I mean, their prospect pool, even though they've traded some pieces in the past. I mean, J.T. Compher is one of them, who just recently got recalled by the Avalanche, by the way. But, I mean, some guys have been traded, but the Sabres still have good young pieces that are coming up. Brendan Gooley, Will Borgen, Nick Baptiste. I mean, you're looking at some other kids, like even kids that were drafted. I mean, Alex Nylander's another one. He's number 2 in Craig Button's list. Yeah, I mean, he's struggling this year. He's not putting up the production that I'm sure he would like doing that he's accustomed to. He's a damn good player, but he's 18 years old playing in the American Hockey League. That's a challenge in itself, playing in 18 who, you're just a kid. You're still not physically mature enough. I mean, he's not physically mature by far, but he's trying to play in a man's league. And Nylander's played relatively well, and I can understand why he's getting some praise from Craig Button because, not every day do you see an 18-year-old playing at the AHL level. But Sabres, they're still young. They still have talent, and they still got players who are coming up through the system, and they're going to be contenders to make this roster over the next couple of years still. And you know what? Next year, Justin Bailey, Evan Rodriguez, Will Carrier, maybe even Nick Baptiste, all 4 of those guys are going to contend for a roster spot day 1 with the Sabres. And all 4 of those guys can skate with speed. They can play some physical hockey. I mean, the young wave of players for the Sabres prospects is finally starting to come about, where in years past we see, we've got good prospects. Now they're starting to get into the NHL, and that's a good sign. That's a good thing. And if they mature and if they are able to build a little credibility in the NHL, I mean, the Sabres next year or the year after next year could be contenders in the playoffs. I mean, the Sabres are in a better spot, I believe, than the Bills are. And, we know the Bills story. They've been to the playoffs in 17 years. But with the Sabres, I'm fine where they're at right now. But, again, if the players are losing their trust in Dan Biles, if they're not listening to Dan Biles, unless it's a couple of players, Dan Biles was not going to have a job at the end of the season in April.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going with it too. I was thinking that if he loses the locker room, that's really bad. But I think to me, it all depends on which players he's lost. If he's lost Jack and Ryan O'Reilly and Rasmus Ristolainen and players like that, then you really can't choose a coach over those players. You have to choose someone who can get through to the players. But if it's someone else, maybe they can work on it. But the one thing I want to mention, too, before we get going here, because I want to wrap this up real fast, but one thing Tim Murray did point out as well, speaking of young talent, Will Carrier, likely to miss the remainder of the season with a knee injury. Originally was expected just to be they said it was just a bruise of the knee. It's turned into he still can't put weight on his leg, so his knee is still pretty banged up. Like I said, he'll probably miss the rest of the season, especially with the Sabres being almost out of the playoff picture. Shut him down for the rest of the year. Give a shot to a Justin Bailey or an Evan Rodriguez or Nick Baptiste, as you mentioned. Let them get some time in the National Hockey League and go forward from there. And the one last thing I want to say about the Buffalo Sabres before we wrap up here is I want to kind of give like a final thought. When it comes to the Buffalo Sabres on the 2017 NHL Trade Deadline, I'm pleased with the fact that Tim Murray didn't pull the trigger on stupid trades. He didn't trade just to make a trade. He said, this is fair market value. This is what we're going to stick with. And if we can't get it, we're not going to do anything. It's very frustrating, absolutely, because he can't do his job as a general manager in the National Hockey League. But at the end of the day, it'll probably work out better for the Buffalo Sabres, both short term and long term. If don't make a trade just to make a trade, and Tim Murray didn't do that today, and that's a good thing, I think.
Yeah, no, I mean, looking at it at the end of the day, Tim Murray didn't, obviously didn't make any notable trades, but sometimes when you're looking at it, it's never a bad thing. I mean, you can keep a guy like Kulikov, see what he can do in the final 19 games of the season if he remains healthy. And maybe in the last 19 games, he has a nice turnaround, and everybody says, okay, the last 19 games was a promise. Plus, maybe next year we want to see more of Kulikov. Maybe we think, okay, if he can stay healthy next year, maybe he can, play like he did when he was in Florida. Maybe he can, play like he did in the World Cup of Hockey. And maybe he can find some consistency in his game in Buffalo. And, again, another thing is, maybe if the Sabres fire Bilesma, they have a new coach come in with a new system, maybe Kulikov will perform better in that system because maybe it'll fit for him better. I mean, and we said with Bilesma, things get overcomplicated with things at times. And if you can make things less complex, less complicated, then maybe they'll make it easier for Kulikov. Maybe he'll come in next year fully healthy, 100%, in shape, ready to go, and he'll be the defenseman, the second, third, defenseman on the team that we've been looking for and waiting for, and he'll play really well. I mean, I think that next year you could easily try and talk him into signing a 1 or 2 year deal that maybe pays him $4.5 million, a little bit of a pay raise from his past contract, which, it's a risk, but you know what? It's a risk that I'd be willing to take at least. I think I'd be open to bringing Kulikov back, but looking at the other trades here too, it's non-trades, I should say. Cody Francis is probably going to be gone at the end of the year. I'm pretty sure he's not going to be back. But let him finish strong here. I mean, he's going to play unless he gets hurt. And then you look at Brian Johnson and Vander Kane. If Vander Kane can stay healthy, and if Vander Kane can, stay out of trouble, then maybe he gets a contract clock starting. Maybe he gets attention from other teams, and maybe the price value for him goes up, and Tim Murray maybe makes a trade. And then with Brian Gianza, I mean, if he wants to finish his career here in Buffalo, or if he wants to just finish this season, get 1,000 games in with the Sabres, that's fine. It's not really a big deal. So, while we all want trades, and we're always so hyped up because of trades, and because we've been so active on the trade deadline over the past few years, not trading is not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, it's always exciting when there's trades. I think it's always fun to get some fresh blood, some new blood in the system, and get draft picks and prepare. But then again, you look at this year's draft, not exactly the best draft to acquire picks in this year. I know that some teams have picked up some first round picks and second round picks, but I mean, there's been talk that the 20th overall pick in this year's draft could be just as valuable and just as worthy as the 50th overall pick this year's draft. So, looking at it and looking at the value that you could have gotten out of those players, I mean, it seems like that whatever you were going to get for France and for Kulikov, it was probably just going to be draft picks. And if that was the case, then, if you couldn't get anything in return, it may not necessarily be a bad thing you didn't make a trade.
That's how I feel, and that's how it is. That's how it'll be until next time, man. I appreciate you. I want to thank you for joining me, Brayton. You can follow him at BJ Wilson WGR on Twitter. Follow me at WolfBLTD. Check us out at BLTD Sports and BLTDsports.com. Brayton, again, thanks for joining me, man. And hopefully next year's trade deadline is a little more exciting.
The preceding presentation has been brought to you by the Gear Network.